Hey everyone, welcome to Conversation Piece with Patrick Armstrong. I am the titular Patrick, and this is a show where we talk about the missing pieces of the conversations we're already having. Shout out to all our returning listeners, and a high five and hello to everyone joining us for the very first time. Thank you so much. For too long, adoptees have not been the authors of our own stories. That's changing, and this month we're joining the discourse to be part of that change. Together with BIPOC Adoptees, we are reclaiming our narratives by honing in on specific areas of the BIPOC adoptee experience that need to be amplified right now. This is a brave space for adoptees to share with the world what we know is needed both inside and outside our community. These are the BIPOC Adoptee Conversations. My guest today is a transracial adoptee born and raised in Wyoming. They are an artist, writer, advocate, and library worker, and they currently live in the Pacific Northwest with their husband and fur children. It is an honor and my privilege to welcome Lisa MacLellan to the show. Hey, Lisa, thanks for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me, Patrick. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here.
We were just having a really lovely conversation off air before we hopped on mic, and I know that we've been connected on Instagram for a while, just to give a little background context to our audience out there, and it really means a lot because I know you've been a big supporter of mine as I've been navigating this space in this journey for probably the last 3 years. I feel like we connected a long time ago.
Yes,
and so
definitely.
I wanted to get on record and just share my appreciation and my gratitude to you for being someone that has supported me, being a person who has been part of this community with me as I've went on this journey, particularly in the parts and stages that I find myself in now. So thank you. And it is very, very exciting. And again, a privilege to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Well, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. And just having this platform, encouraging its adoptees to share their stories. It's taken me a really long time to feel brave enough.
Sure.
I'm not sure I'm even still quite there, but seeing bravery in other adoptees sharing their stories, sharing their lives, like you do, it's something that's helped me kind of get to the point I'm at. So I really appreciate you as well for, kind of stepping up and being brave and showing me personally that I can kind of have that bravery as well, I guess. And how impactful the stories could be. Knowing how impactful they've been for me, it's really kind of helped me and encouraged me to share my own story as well. Just knowing that I've been impacted, so hopefully my words can impact someone else as well.
100%. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's the thing that we've talked about on the show before is how for a long time we never had spaces of safety to even just learn or unpack our stories or understand who we are at a core level. And once we find it, it can take a long time still even to work through safety to get to a point of bravery to even start sharing. And it's a huge privilege to share any part of your life with any one person. And we take that for granted a lot of times in this country, in the society, in the world that we currently live in. And, I just realized over the past 3 years of doing podcasting and sitting in community with other adoptees specifically who have felt safe and brave enough to share their stories with me and with us on the John Chi Show, it's something that I don't take lightly. So it means a lot for me for you to share that, not only about the impact of my personal work, but just the impact of the community itself and the stories that are out there. And I'm really excited to dive into this with you today to learn a little bit more about you and what you think is missing from this conversation that we're having right now about the BIPOC adoptee experience. Before we answer that question, though, I introduced you just a little bit, but for folks who are listening who may not know who you are specifically, do you mind sharing just a little bit more about yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure no one knows who I am. So
you never know.
Yeah, you never know. So I'm Lisa. I was born and raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Let's see. I guess a little bit about my backstory. I have recently found a lot about my biological background. That's very recent to me in the last maybe 5 years, probably.
Okay.
I was the kid who grew up, I think I was so sure I would never meet anyone in my biological life or circle that I convinced myself I didn't want to. If you would have asked me even probably 10 years ago, I would have said, no, no, I don't even care. I was so sure I couldn't have it that I just really, from childhood, convinced myself I didn't need that. I didn't care where I came from. It was like trying to not disappoint myself before.
Sure.
Anyway, so it turns out I've known my whole life growing up that I'm biracial. So I have a white mother, a black father. I found out a little bit later in life that my biological mother was actually sent to sort of a home for unwed mothers is the best way I could describe it. I was born in the late 70s. So I especially think, being an unwed mother at that time was frowned upon. I mean, I think obviously in certain cases here now, today in 2023, that is still frowned upon. So my biological family is from Nebraska. They sent my biological mother to Cheyenne, Wyoming to give birth to me, partially. And this is something I wanted to talk about today was, I shouldn't even say partially, 100% they sent me away because I was Black. So my biological mother, I shared with her family that she had, was impregnated by a Black man. And their kind of immediate response was, well, I mean, I'm sure part of it was her age and part of it was, again, the optics of an unwed mother. But I have talked with a biological, like maternal auntie, and she has confirmed to me what I've kind of known my whole life is that my race is the reason I was relinquished from my family. So yeah, I was raised in a family in Wyoming. I have two white parents. I have a white sister who's the biological child of my parents. And I have a brother who is not biologically related to me, but who is also biracial Black and adopted.
Okay.
So I did have a sibling growing up, which is honestly another part of the conversation I think is interesting. And maybe we don't talk about enough. Kind of interfamily dynamics, and those of us maybe raised with another adoptee in the family, either of the same race or a different race, and how those family dynamics can work. But I moved out to the Northwest kind of right after high school. I was ready to leave Wyoming. I have a deep, deep love and affinity for Wyoming, I think because it's one of the only things I have like ownership over. Like I was born there. I was raised there. I feel this connection to it because of that. But it's also Wyoming, so I don't care for the politics.
Sure.
There's not just a lot of opportunity there in general. I feel kind of lucky. I was raised in Cheyenne, which is really close to the Colorado border, so I was able to go to like Denver a lot growing up and like kind of visit a city and kind of a little bit see something else. But yeah, so I moved to the Northwest right away after college or after high school and went to college out here. I actually have a master's degree in environmental chemistry, which I do not use. And instead, I love books and I love reading and I love sharing that. And my mom was a school teacher and I was raised like reading and going to the library. I mean, I spent hours and hours like nerd all the way at the library, proud of it. So I switched to library work, and I've been doing that now for a while and absolutely love working at a library. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And
yeah.
You said that you've been going through all of this within the last 5 years. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how you first entered into this like consciousness of your identity as an adoptee specifically, and if that has all coincided with this journey through your biological and first family revelations that you found, or if one came very distinctly before the other?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've always, my whole life, adoption was a huge part of my identity. I feel like because my parents, I mean, as a transracial adoptee, you can't hide the fact that you're adopted.
Right.
Your perception of yourself and people's perceptions of you are really very early. You start to perceive those things a lot earlier than I think maybe other children do. But I think because I couldn't hide it and because I couldn't face the fact that and by kind of, I mean, I did hate it. I couldn't even speak those words until probably a year ago. But I decided to just embrace it, right? Just full on. I would be like, I'm adopted. I would like pop through rooms and like talk about it before it came up kind of thing. And then I just told myself, I'm just going to be the ambassador for adoption because I can't hide it. I can't, so I just suppressed every other emotion I had towards it and was like, well, this is it. This is what's happening. So I'm doing it. That's kind of how I treated it up until I was, I'm going to say in my 30s. I'm 43 now. So this was around the age of about 38 that I started thinking. Honestly, what kind of kicked it off a little bit is an author, Nicole Chung. Her first book, All You Can Ever Know. I read that book, and I do attribute a lot to her and Rebecca Carroll, Surviving the White Gaze, which came along a little bit later. But reading Nicole's book, and she details her kind of finding her first family and her experiences as an adoptee. It kind of got me thinking about more about finding my first family. And I had already done 23andMe, partially and mostly because I wanted to know something about my health history, right? Like I'm getting close to 40. So I start thinking like, oh, it wouldn't be the worst thing to know some of this information. And I also, because, I mean, you can see me, I am what I like to describe as ethnically ambiguous. I always identified as Black my whole childhood. My mom told me, you know, I had a Black father, biological father. So that's how I was always identified. But through my life, I've had people ask me quite literally if I'm probably any race you can imagine. I mean, from Asian, Native, I mean, just really people are like, have asked me every single thing. So I was
no
kind of
shame
like,
on their own part. They're just like, hey, let me just assume what you are and
zero
ask you
shame.
directly to your face.
Zero shame. They're like, what are you? Question. I'm like, what? How is that? Who do you... Or I also got a lot of, how are you so tan? I'm failing to understand how you're so tan. Like, okay. Wow. So I think just to quiet the, you know, those voices in my head saying like, are you really Black? You know, it's something I think we've talked, the adoptee community talks about, obviously, but identity, transracial adoption, how that's related. So even though I always identified that way, you know, you still have that voice saying like, are you? And even if you are, you're transracial, you know, so I kind of wanted that information. And I'm, again, a scientist. So it was like, give me some data. Like, I want to see that data. So that's part of it, right? I wanted health information. So after reading Nicole Chung's book, I decided, I was like, I'm going to reach out to, you know, someone in this list of, it's like 10,000 relatives you have out to your 800 14th cousin. And so I reached out to this woman, and I explained the situation, and she very kindly is like, well, I don't know anything about this, but I do think I know who would. And so I'm going to reach out to them and I'll get back to you. And sure enough, she reaches out to a woman who is my biological maternal auntie. She knows the whole story. She's the oldest of this family. And so she does want to be in touch with me. And I learn all this information from her about my past, or I should say my biological family, first family, and their past. They were unsure exactly who my biological father was. But after sending her a picture of me, she was like, oh, I know who it is. It's this person.
Dang.
So I look, and I have actually shared a picture of myself and my biological father on Instagram. I'm like a carbon copy of this man. It's pretty interesting. The genes are I look nothing like my biological mother's side. I don't see any, but I look carbon copy. So after finding out who my biological father was, and I can say honestly, I was a lot less interested in my biological mother's side, because for me, the quota of white people and whiteness I had in my life was overflowing. I was like, I get it. I have all the white family I could ever imagine or need, to be honest. So what I'm interested in is like this side of me that I feel like was robbed from me. Like, I have this right to know about my Black culture. I identify as Black. I want to know more about that. And like, where did I come from? Where were we part of the Great Migration? You know, I just had all these questions, and I know all this history, and I just wanted to know where I fit in with that. So after finding out this man's name, I actually just started doing like Facebook, Instagram stalking. And located what turns out to be, I have 6 biological cousins. They're all Black women. 5 of them are biracial Black women.
Mm.
3 of them actually live in the same area as me, like grew up in this area that I moved to
Wow.
later in life. And so I've now been in touch with all of them. I spend time with them. And I actually just received, again, the data that I'm genetically related to them. One of them did 23andMe
Oh,
finally.
okay.
And I got this confirmation. Literally, this was like yesterday or 2 days ago. And I
Wow.
told all of them, like, I know we're all like carbon copies of each other. Like, literally, we have a picture together where it's like cut, slight, edit, paste, basically. But I was like, again, I wanted this data. I wanted, being an adoptee, it's not kind of enough to
Sure.
have those looks. People could look alike.
Because
I
it's
don't
always
know.
speculation because we don't really know. We don't have that hard data, like you said,
Yes, exactly. So that was really important to me. And so, yeah, I've just finally confirmed, like, I know biologically who these people are. And a lot of it just came from Nicole Chung's book, from just realizing I did have a desire to know this part of me and to know specifically that kind of Black side of me, the part of me that I've identified with more so my whole life anyway.
Well, first off, shout out Nicole Chung, multiple
Uh-huh.
times referenced on this show, helping so many adoptees like
Love her.
navigate their
Love her.
journeys in so many different ways. Okay, I have so many questions that I want to ask you, and feel free to not answer if you don't want, if it's
Oh.
too fresh. But you said like you just got this confirmation of
Uh-huh.
biological relation. How are you feeling?
I will say, because I have been in contact with these biological cousins now for a couple of years, so they
Mhm.
had already open armed, like, folded
Sure.
me into their family, which was so sweet. When I first talked to one of the cousins, she instantly, I was straight up with her and said, I have no DNA proof of this, but here's XYZ why I think this. She and I chatted over, Google Meets or whatever the first time that we interacted, and she was like, "Nah, you're definitely part of the. I see it. I have apparently similar mannerisms to my
Sure.
biological father, and again, like I said, I look just like him. I look a lot like all of these women. So they were already like, we accept you, yay. So honestly, finding out the DNA stuff didn't change a lot for me because I've just am so lucky and felt so
Sure.
welcomed by them already. But I will say one of the tough things I had was meeting their father, who is my
Mm.
biological father's brother.
Sure.
So I know my biological father wants nothing to do with me. He's stated that.
Mm.
So it felt weird for me to meet his brother,
Right.
who open arms accepted me and like immediately gave me a hug. But it took me a long time to want to meet him. So I actually only met him probably a month ago or so because it took so
Okay.
long. They kept kind of inviting me to meet him, and I was like, I don't know.
Sure. Totally.
And it turns out he was nervous too, which kind of made me feel better about it as well. But in general, it has made me feel really good because this is a whole side thing, but both of my adoptive parents now have passed away, and my
Okay.
mom most recently a little over a year ago. So this is a whole other thing, but the feeling of disconnection from my family after losing my parents
Sure.
is really complicating. And so having this other kind of new family, not to replace my family,
Right.
but it was just like this really well-timed almost
Right.
thing to start to feel this disconnection from my adoptive family. Losing my mom was like still very devastating to me. And so it's been really, nice to have this whole other family,
Sure.
coming up and accepting me. And that's been a very complex feelings for sure, but it's been mostly, I would say, good for sure. And I think it will continue to, as I develop relationships with them, continue to feel good because they've all just been really accepting, really wide open arms. And yeah.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, for sharing as much about this as you have in a very short period of time, because like you just said, it's a whole range of complex emotions and feelings and thought processes that I can't even begin to imagine, not being in reunion with any part of my first or biological family in any way, and
Right.
even just very much at the beginning stages of even pursuing anything like that.
Right.
And like yourself, you mentioned at the very beginning how you felt resigned for a long time to the fact that you're never going to get that information.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've been that way for even since I started this journey 3 years ago, but also leading all the way up to that, I'm like, I'm never going to have that information. I don't even know if I want it. And then I started this journey and I'm like, okay, I would love to have that information, but I've heard enough stories now where it's like, that seems pretty far afield from reality. And I'm okay because I know I'm not the only person that's going through it. And then I have this experience in Korea, and now I'm like angry about it now. And there's like a whole bunch of other things that have come up, and it's like, oh, I do want this information. And I think I've just been repressing the feeling of wanting that, for all the different reasons. So I just really appreciate you sharing that. There's so much that I'm resonating with. And
because the anger is real too. Like the anger, meeting these people now and feeling so angry that I didn't have all the years with them. Like I meet these people. I'm loving all these women, and I'm like, I could have grown up with you. Like that 100%. Makes me so mad.
Okay, well, let's dive in. Let's dive into that then, especially in the wake of movies like Joyride, which deal in a reunion plot line and a birth searching plot line. There is this drive and this hunger and desperation from our community to have these stories told correctly, and I think there are a lot of things that people just don't understand about that particular journey. So from your perspective, what do you think is missing from that conversation around reunion, around even the thought of wanting to reunite or look for or find any information, let alone actual reunion with a biological family? What do you think is missing from that conversation?
Oh man. Ooh. I mean, I think what was surprising to me and I didn't expect, and I feel like I haven't necessarily, I mean, I think the reunification conversation, there's a lot missing just because so many of us haven't been in reunification. Like that is a lot of work. There's so much privacy around adoption, particularly obviously internationally, but even domestically. I'm from a completely closed state adoption. Wyoming is completely closed state. So I may never see my original birth certificate. I would have had to go through all of this confidential immediate, So I think a lot of us are not going to have a reunification. And so that some of that conversation just isn't there because so many of us don't have it and are not going to have it. But one of the main things I was surprised about was just how mad and I suppressed. I mean, I think I've suppressed a lot of emotions about things my whole life, but I suppressed, I think, that anger. I guess I didn't even realize how angry I was about it. Honestly, until I saw some of my biological cousins like interacting with each other, and I could see all that history that they had with one another. And I was so aware that I was never going to be able to have that. Like, there's no way I can go back in time and grow up with these people and know them my whole life. And yes, I have other cousins that I've grown up with and known my whole life, but they're not my biological relations. We don't share that same ancestry. I think even that aspect, the importance of ancestry, I never thought about how important it was to listen to my body, how what I carry inside of me is my ancestry. What I carry inside of me is my past. And we're taught to ignore those signals. I think we're all kind of taught that, but particularly adoptees, you almost have to ignore all of these signals your body's telling you because you're placed in strangers' homes and you're trying to just be part of the family. You want that. You want a family. You want to be part of this family. So, you just ignore all of these signals and all of these things that your body might be sharing with you, that I believe, comes from generations. I mean, it's like proven now things about generational trauma. And I just feel like I don't share that with my family because we don't have the same biology and the importance of that. That was all just very shocking to me to see those relationships and be like, man, I'm never going to have that. I'm so mad that I can't go back in time. And yes, I have the future. Sure, I will continue to put in effort. I want to have relationships with all these women. But yeah, I just can't.
And it's
I
still
can't get
not
back
the same.
No, exactly. Yeah, I can't. It's that familiarity that I'll kind of probably never had, it won't ever be the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I have been dealing with something similar after my experience in Korea with that anger and this concept of a loss of history, and especially when you're talking about ancestry and then like personal lineage. Like I can't just look
Yes.
down my line and see who my parents were, who their parents were. I can't trace my family back to, or my specific bloodline back to this clan who came from this area of Korea or whatever it was. I don't have any of that. And like that's where a lot of my anger is coming from. And for you specifically in your experience, you have this added layer of I mean, I think it makes so much sense that anger is there anyways, because that anger is something easy to suppress because we're told, especially as adoptees, to not be angry, like, and to be grateful, to lean into that gratitude feeling, which it is the antithesis, I think, of anger. And so we repress a lot of that. And so it makes sense that that's there. Also, for you, you have this other layer of knowing too that you were relinquished based on your race specifically. And you grow up and seeing that you have not only these 6 cousins that are all Black women, but 5 of them are also biracial, like yourself, who share in that identity, and realizing too, oh, I not only lost this familial sense, this familiarity that we could have built, but literally I had these people in my life who could have been these models for me and could have helped me understand myself and to live into this identity. Not that you didn't develop that on your own, but
Well,
again, like you said, like you can't go back in time and then do it over again. We have to now start from where we are. And so can you talk a little bit about how that plays into this whole thing, how that relinquishment based on race specifically plays into this conversation, and how it's something that we tend to maybe not talk about enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think part of why we probably don't talk about it a lot is that it's obviously not everyone's experience. Like specifically, I'm biracial, or this could be specific to someone who's biracial or multiracial, so there's that part of it. But I will say, again, back to anger, I think I was always angry that I was adopted. Like I say, now I can say, and it took me a long time to say, but I hate that I'm adopted. And I just, I couldn't face that for so long.
Sure.
But, when I was young, it's not like my parents ever said to me, look, you were given up because you're Black. But what they did say to me a lot was, we didn't care what race you were. We didn't care what race you were. And even I had some hard conversations with my mom before she passed away, and she still would say that kind of stuff to me. Like she still would say, and I know her intention was not to make me think one way or the other, but as a kid, I'm hearing you say, you don't care what race I was, but that indicates to me someone cared. So even though no one explicitly told me that as a child, I grew up 100% knowing, thinking, but knowing I was given up because I was Black. So to have it confirmed later, I thought was going to maybe make me feel better about it or something, like, haha, I was right. But instead I was like, so mad. It just obviously made me so much more angry, and angry at my biological mother's family, like kind of specifically. I actually cut off any kind of communication with my maternal side at this point because I was so angry. And the maternal auntie that I was talking to always would say things to me like, you're so lucky that you were adopted, etc. Yeah, she actually just sent me this email that I was trying to tell my husband about, but then I was like, I feel like you just have to read it because it's so weird. Like, she details how I'm lucky and how I probably would have been sexually abused if I had stayed in their family. I'm telling you, it's like, I'm just like, why do you keep emailing me? Like, that's your trauma that now I don't know. It was just a very odd situation, and she doesn't seem to quite understand. And this is part of why I don't really want to communicate with her, because I certainly don't need someone telling me from the family that gave me away because of my race that I'm lucky for that. When she doesn't know. She doesn't know what could have happened to me had I stayed in their family. She doesn't know. Apparently my biological mother has a lot of like issues, and I'm like, maybe I would have been the thing that got her shit together. You don't know. Like, there's just no reason to tell me that. You shouldn't speak on adoption if you're not adopted. Don't go around telling adoptees we're lucky or to be grateful, or And so that just makes me even more mad to think about. But I also learned, and this just enraged me at the time, was that this maternal auntie I'm talking to, she had a child the same year I was born, white child, kept. I also learned that her mother, so my grandmother, was pregnant at the same time as my biological mother,
Oh, wow.
had a child. So my uncle, same year, same exact age, white, kept. So they had 3 children born in their family that year. 2 of them kept in the family, me discarded, which is just like obviously infuriating. So,
Yeah.
you know, I interestingly think in some ways, hearing that from my parents and like knowing that I was relinquished for being Black affirmed my Blackness in a way. Like I've
Sure.
thought a lot about why have always identified as Black. I honestly mostly say biracial Black, so that I have complicated feelings about saying biracial Black, but I mostly say it to make sure I'm expressing that I know my experiences are different from
Sure.
someone who is not biracial. But I've always, again, identified as Black, and I have always kind of wondered, like, why was I so sure about that? And I thought, maybe my mom kind of did try to affirm it. She was definitely almost embarrassingly so, would wear like cross color shirts when I was
Oh,
young
okay.
and just do stuff like that. That I was like, all right, my brother and I were like, Mom, you gotta,
Gotta
but she was
cool it
like,
on down.
try,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
exactly.
get
But
it.
she was, I guess, trying in her way. So I thought maybe it was some of that. But then I think the more I thought about it, it was that I knew that I was relinquished for this purpose, and that I guess made me feel that connection, and just Black history.
Right.
That's a common thing. Like, what's
Right.
Blacker than that? It's like that kind of, in a weird way, helped affirm that for me,
Sure.
which is kind of great. Not that I still don't have obviously identity issues, and to your point, meeting these other biracial women would have been awesome to grow up with, cousins that were also biracial, and
Yeah.
we could have, I have conversations with them now about being biracial and living in a community that's really white, and how that, it just would have been nice to be able to have those conversations, growing up, and have
Right.
other people to just share that experience with.
Well, because you learn like language about it, and then you get a chance to like articulate your own thing. And then if you go through, especially a negative experience, you have somebody that you can like turn to, hopefully, to talk about it, and who will
Mhm.
get it. In the way that adoptees, when we meet each other, we kind of get it. We don't have
Yes.
to go through the whole preamble of like, oh, I grew up in a tiny white town, and like
Yeah.
I had like to experience racism in this way, and people may like,
Yes.
we just already understand at that level, so we can kind of dive right into the deeper stuff if we want, or just keep it light and breezy, whatever
Yes.
whatever we
Right.
need to do at the moment.
Absolutely.
And also, like you said, you're learning about carrying our ancestry within our bodies, and like that relinquishment in that trauma is foundational to you and your existence. And so it makes total sense that your identity as a Black person was affirmed specifically through learning about this history, because it was already there. It was already
Yes.
foundational in you.
Yes.
And unfortunately, through a terrible, traumatic way, was it
Right.
made foundational.
Right. Yes.
And it, I don't know, for whatever reason, it was just an opportunity for you to be able to even lean into it even more, because you already were. And it was just
Mhm.
like, you're getting these little data points that
Yes.
allow
Yes.
you to be affirmed in whatever it is, whatever part of your identity that you're working on at that time.
It's like, I think you kind of look for those things to like grasp for as an
100%.
adoptee. It's like, what can I have ownership over? And so hearing
100%.
that, I was like, all right, I'm taking ownership of that.
Well, like you
You
talk
know?
about your maternal auntie trying to dictate to you what your experience would have been or is, and
Right.
and that's something that was missing from this conversation always, is that we're all never allowed to be the author of our own story. That we're always either part of the words and the page that's happening, or we are just a footnote in whatever someone else's story is. We're not allowed to be the author, the teller of our own stories. And when we do that, it really pushes back and resists this idea of what the dominant narrative of adoption is, which is that
Yes.
everything was fine, or if you would have
Yes.
stayed with your first family, everything would have been terrible.
Right.
Like
Right. It's
it's
magical thinking that
100%.
and her idea of my parents and family, of which she knows very little about, other than me just saying, here's facts about my family. She's like, I'm so grateful you had these loving parents and et cetera. And it's like, I did, but a lot of adoptees don't. And
Right.
you don't really know my
Right.
experience. Like, you're kind of assuming, you're hoping I went to a family that was so loving and,
Exactly.
here I am. But I'm like, that's A, not true for all adoptees. And B, I still have a ton of trauma. You know, I'm like, I have anxiety my whole life, depression, ADHD. It's just like identity issues. I'm like, I'm from a successful adoption.
Right.
And I still, you know, my parents loved me. My mom, I loved her dearly. It's still, though, I was like, that love
It
does
doesn't
not.
save us or protect us from the terrible
No,
things that might be happening or the traumas associated with being adopted. I resonate with that
absolutely.
so much because I feel the same way. You look at my
Mhm.
life and it would be like, oh, you had such a great life. You had such a
Okay.
positive adoption experience. And yeah, I
Okay.
do have a great relationship with my family still. I did
Okay.
have a lot of privilege and I didn't want for things.
Yeah.
From a material standpoint, especially, and then also from like a support and love standpoint from my adoptive
Yeah.
family. Like they never made me feel different in that way, but it was color blindness. It was,
will.
oh, you're being too sensitive. You're taking that the wrong way when I expressed something that might have happened to me. And it was, we don't really talk about our feelings in that way. And that didn't really stop me from expressing emotion, but it didn't help me
Yes.
develop emotional intelligence, which I would not develop for a long time.
Gotcha.
So I really resonate with that. You mentioned at the top of this specifically regarding relinquishment based on race, as we don't really talk about it that much because it's not everyone's experience. I would also say that almost makes it more important for us to talk about it because we need to, for us in the community, we need to be at least aware of the other experiences that exist within our larger diaspora. So that way, again, we don't represent everyone every time we speak, or we're not the one end all be all of experiences for adoptees. However, when we talk about it, we can at least be able to point to, you know, there's a much more diverse community here than what is shown historically in media or whatever it might be. Even in data right now, it's like it's much more complex and nuanced than that. How do we as adoptees make sure that we're addressing this part of the conversation?
Good question. Even when I was filling out the form, I'm like, I will say, I think just hopefully more and more of us sharing our story, the more that we are the authors of our stories, I think the more really it can be addressed. And for me, it kind of brought up, I was thinking about, so I did the first like BIPOC adoptee here in the Northwest storytelling event. It was in Portland. And I shared some of my story, and part of that was talking about that I was relinquished because I was Black. And I was chatting with some adoptees afterwards, and one of the adoptees said to me, I mean, she kind of was like, wow, I didn't think about that would be maybe a reason someone was like placed for adoption. And she was like, she just like looked me dead in the eye and was like, you deserved better than that. And I was like,
damn, yeah, that's like, I'm about to start crying.
Yes, I was
Dang.
like, and I think that's kind of what got me thinking that would be my answer to your question of like, what is the missing piece? Is that I, for one, haven't met a lot of other adoptees that have told me that same thing, or any. I'm not sure I've encountered another adoptee that either knows that or shared that with me, but I just haven't. And I have met a fair number of like other like biracial adoptees, but you know, I just hadn't had that shared with me before. So that was part of it. It's like, I want to get this out there. I'm not sure, you know, there's got to be other people in this scenario, but hearing from her and having her kind of say like, oh, I kind of thought of that. And then just her saying that to me, I don't know, it just really, I was like, other people in my position need to hear that too. You know, it's like, I
100%.
really was like, oh, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you. I didn't deserve that. You know? So I think that's kind of part of it, is like just other adoptees. Like you said, we kind of almost know something about each other when we meet each other.
Right.
Because we have a lot of, you know, shared experience. And I guess just being able to hold space for each other like that and speak truthfully, like from our hearts to each other, that to me is, I think, a reason for us all to share stories. Like to your point, that we want all of our stories out there And I kind of just feel like when I share that, the people who I get the most affirmation from and the people who hold that space for me the most or the best are other adoptees, even if that wasn't their experience. It's like
Sure.
it was like she just knew what to say. She spoke from her heart, and it just, crushed. Like I was just crushed with like affection and like,
Yeah.
and I went home that day just like feeling so good. And I have struggled with my mental health a lot, especially since my mom died. And it's really only been since we did that storytelling event, I think it was in June. And like kind of since then, my mental health has been doing a lot better as I've found this community, been able to have a safe space to share this story. I mean, what I read to them, I've only shown to my husband, my brother, because he's also adopted, one of my cousins, and then the adoptee group. I mean, I wouldn't show it to my sister. I wouldn't
Sure.
show it to my, it was so, just vulnerable. And so I feel like some of my mental health improvement has come from being able to share my story and have people who understand, even if they don't have the exact same experience,
Right.
like see me and talk to me in a way that I needed to hear. So I guess to answer your question, I really just feel like we just need to hold space for each other. I'm a yoga teacher, so like saying things like holding space is like something that I'm used to saying. But I mean, what I mean by that is that you listen, that you see that person, and you respond to them in a way that's authentic to you. To me, that's holding space for someone. So that's what I think we can do in community for each other, any of us,
I love that. I think that's such important advice. Shout out to that adoptee for seeing you and validating you in that way.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons that we're capable of doing this within our community specifically is we have fought so hard and so long to be seen and heard. And we usually are met by people who are listening to respond to us and then dictate back to us what our story is or why we're wrong in our experience, as opposed to listening to understand our experience. And then, like you said, responding empathetically, responding authentically from who they are. And by doing that, we are allowing ourselves to not only be empathetic, and not to be like, I fully understand what you're going through. Like you said, we don't all share the same experience.
Right.
However, I can resonate with what you're feeling, and I can also validate you in your feelings. And it doesn't make my experience any less. It doesn't make adoptee Joe over here any less.
Right.
Like, it doesn't change anyone else's. You are just as valid as the next person standing in line to tell their story. And the more opportunities that we have, which is what I love about what BIPOC adoptees have been doing, is the more opportunities that we create for folks to be safe enough to start to unpack that, and then like yourself, find the stairway of bravery to begin to share some of these things that we hold so closely and so personally to ourselves, and with a group of people who get it. It's how we create the change that we want to see within our own community. It's how we get people outside of our community to start recognizing us and seeing us, because we have to model for them specifically what it looks like to be empathetic towards each other. Because we're not seen as an identity. Adoptee or being adopted is not seen as something that is an identity or affects you in that way every day, but it does.
Yes.
And we are still trying to work to the point of people recognizing that. And so we have to become the models for folks outside of the adoptee community to see what it looks like to extend that kind of empathy to each other. Do you have advice for folks outside of our community to address not even just the community broadly, but even those specific pieces that we've been talking about in this conversation?
First, I want to say, I love that you just point out validation too. I think that's something that's sometimes really hard. I'm sure for anyone, but adoptees have a hard time sort of, because we've always been told what our story is. And it makes it hard for us to validate our own feelings, I think, and experiences. I know that I'm constantly not validating my own feelings and experiences. That's something my therapist is constantly telling me. And I still will start to say something like, I feel this way. And I have to stop myself from being like, I mean, I know other people feel, I mean, I know this could happen to someone else. She's like, just stop. What are you? It's like, tell me what you're feeling. And I think that's huge, that adoptees, we validate each other. I hear like things you shared, and it resonates with me and it validates how I'm feeling. And that is so huge. I think that's like Nicole Chung's book, Rebecca Carroll's book. Reading those that's the best way to put it, is that I finally was like, I'm feeling validated right now. I'm reading from someone else experiences they had, feelings they had, things that they're sharing, and that actually made me feel validated. So I just want to say I love that you said validation. And I kind of think people outside the adoptee community, I mean, basically what they need to do is like shut the mouth and open the ears, like you need to listen to us.
Yeah.
Let me tell you my experience. Don't tell me what my experience is. Don't tell me I'm lucky, grateful. It's all the things we've heard. Just shush, shush. We would like to speak now. And I think this about how the laws are made. In addition to like foster care, I work with foster youth, and I'm blown away at the way these laws are written and the processes. And it's so clear to me that foster youth and adoptees have not been in on those conversations and have not been in those rooms to write those laws. And it blows my mind every time I kind of see these experiences where I'm like, yeah, I could have told you that already. It'll be like a non-adoptee or non-fostered person being like, we found that having familiar relationships is really good for this foster child. And I'm like, you just figured that out? Oh, cool. Like, I'm so happy you guys figured that out. But if you could have just asked
anyone over
50
here
years ago who was fostered, you would have already had this answer,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I would think they need to take a seat, and those decisions, all of those laws being written, whatever it is, should be in our hands. The stories written should be by us. I mean, it definitely reminds me, and to your point that we're like another identity. It's like, I work in a library, and I'm quick to not display a book that's written about a Black person. I'm going to display a book written by a Black person.
Right.
I'm not going to display the book written about adoption, not by the adoptee. I'm going to find the one written by the adoptee and put it out. I know that's the story I want to hear. I want to have this Korean cookbook written by someone that's Korean. I don't need that. Yeah, it's just it blows my mind when I see that stuff in the library, and I'm like, who wrote this? They what now? So yeah, I mean, I think really that's what they need to do, and I see it. I know that there's a capacity there. I see it with my husband. He is not adopted. He has an adopted sibling. She's a Korean adoptee, and he as part of when I met him, I was so. Part of my attraction to him was him telling me he had an adopted sibling, because at least then I didn't have to explain to him, yeah, it's my real mom. Yes, it's my real sister. He got all that, right?
Yeah.
But over the years, and especially as I've been coming out of the fog and, kind of figuring my own identity out, he listens. He just listens. He doesn't tell me my business.
Right.
He listens to what I'm saying. He's listening to the experience as I'm going. He watches me go through these experiences. And he just listens. I mean, and supports whatever it is I want to do. Like our next storytelling event, part of it will be open to the wider group. And he's like, do you want me to come? He's not even in the house right now, because he was like, do you want me to be there while you're talking to Patrick, or do you want to do that on your own? And it's like, I said, it's going to be a podcast. I mean, you can be here, but he's like, I'll just listen to it later or whatever. He's like, he just wants me to be talking for me, not worried about anything else. And I think that that's another thing people can do. I think if you're outside the community, let us make those decisions of how we want to approach something.
Exactly.
Support us, listen to us, support us, but don't write the story for us.
Exactly. We'll tell you how you can help us and how you can support us. We don't want you to tell us what the solution is or how to fix us. We don't necessarily need fixing. We need people to listen. We need people to sit and make the attempt at understanding, build that layer of empathy, so that way we can move forward instead of putting on these performances of allyship that don't go anywhere but cause more harm. So
Absolutely.
I so much appreciate everything that you shared in this conversation. And you have taken us on this journey of not only your personal story, but as like an educator, educated a lot of us, myself included, about a lot of these different nuances within this conversation in a scant 50 minutes. And I can't thank you enough for giving us the privilege of that emotional labor, that mental energy, that physical time to be able to impart all of this on myself, on this audience. It means a lot. For you, who are you learning from right now? Who is inspiring you? Who are you taking new perspectives from? Who's helping you reframe what you're thinking about? Who are you learning from at the moment?
I feel like library nerd as I am. It's kind of for me like almost always authors. I mean, not always. I again love podcasts. I love listening to stories. I love storytelling, whether it's really honestly, spoken or read.
Right.
I'm also an artist, so I love graphic novels, and I love. There's graphic novels out that are amazing that are written by transracial adoptees. Locally here at the last storytelling event, I met a woman, Jill Mann, I believe, and she writes these little adoption zines.
Okay.
And I wish I had one to like show, but they're just great. She takes these stories and she just, draws them out into like a little, basically small comic, and they're just amazing. There's something for me about the visual with the storytelling. It's like it's words, it's visual. It's so I just I learn so much anytime I'm reading these things, looking at these things. So Lisa Woolrim Chung, I think is her name. She wrote Palimpsest War. I mean, it is a hard read in so many ways, but it educated me so much personally on transnational, international adoptions. That is something I really didn't know anything about. Like I said, my sister-in-law is a Korean adoptee. She's in a totally different place in her kind of adoption journey. So it's not something she and I had talked a lot about. And I don't think she knows a lot about her kind of past and how she ended up in the U.S. She just hasn't really gone through that, wanted to learn any of that information, know any of that information. So I just thought, like, I'm going to read this. Yeah, I love graphic novel. I'm so excited to find this graphic novel. I'm reading it. I'm literally like crying. I'm like, I can't even. What? Yeah. It's so great. It's so educational. It got me more into learning about transnational adoptions. Now I am much more aware of that. I'm conscious of that when I meet even like foster youth that might have been adopted and now in foster care, or meeting other adoptees and kind of understanding a little bit where they come from. Because to your point, it's like so many similar experiences, but also so different.
Very
and I
different,
think I don't think I wrapped my brain around how strange it could be for someone to feel like, I mean, I'm so mad that I was taken away from my Black culture, in the US.
Right.
I can't imagine thinking, I don't know this language, and there's just so many other, I think, obviously, depth you would understand to this, that her book really opened my eyes to, and learning just more about different countries and how they treat adoption and who's allowing adoption still, who isn't, and some of those things. But I highly recommend to anyone watching, listening to this. Her book really touched me like deeply, and she's an amazing advocate and activist. And she's amazing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those. We will have Jill Zines linked in the show notes. We will have Lisa's, all of her work linked in the show notes as well as Nicole and Rebecca's books linked in the show notes too. So that way everybody can take a look at those if they so choose. I really appreciate you sharing that again, because you've done this education for us, and it's important for us to learn who you're learning from, so that way we can continue to expand our own knowledge and understanding of this experience, of which there are infinite experiences to learn from. And so I really, really, really appreciate it. And before we close it out, I have one more question, one final question for you.
Yeah.
How do we as an audience support you going forward?
Oh, wow. Great question. I don't know. That's a great question. Someday I would like to write a graphic novel or start doing kids' books.
Okay.
So someday, everyone, I would love for you to buy my books if possible.
All right. Is there a way we can send you money right now as like a pre-order support to help you in your pursuit of that?
That's so sweet. That's so sweet. No, I'm like a person. I have a really hard time accepting like.
Oh, I know that feeling for sure.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm just so. For me, it's like very rewarding to do this for like the next generation. Like I consider like I was fostered also when I was young, and I consider us all like siblings. Like I truly am like my adoptive, my foster siblings. Like to me, this is like, I'm just doing this for my family. That's how it feels. So to support me, I would say listen to your adoptee. Listen to adopted people you know. That would support me. Read our stories by us and listen to us. That to me would support, me, I think.
Amazing. Well, you heard it here first, folks. You can support Lisa by just listening to our community and just by doing that work, putting the work in to understand our experiences a little bit more, build that layer of empathy, and then one day physically supporting Lisa by buying her children's book and graphic novels that are coming out. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and again, giving us the privilege and honor of your time, your energy, your story, and your experience. It really means a lot to me, especially as I said at the top, having been connected with you for a while now and know that you have been a supporter of myself and the work that I've been doing. It really means a lot for you to give me this time to hopefully and truly support you going forward as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. It is such a pleasure. And thank you. I just love everything you do. And things that you've said have changed my life as well. So it's awesome to be here and talking to you. So,
I appreciate that. I got to get out of here now before I'm unable to accept your compliments because it is very hard for me to hear something like that and be like, what? Okay. I do really appreciate it. Everybody else listening out there, you can find links to all of the authors, all of the things that we just talked about in our show notes here. If you want to connect with Lisa, you can find the ways to do that in the show notes as well. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at Conversation Podpiece. And if you do feel so inclined to leave a rating or review on whatever you're watching or listening to this on right now, we would greatly appreciate it. Last but not least, if you're interested in supporting this show in the future in any way, feel free to hop in our DMs or visit our website, conversationpeacepod.com. Until next time, I'm Patrick Armstrong, and this has been Conversation Piece. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.